We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Wednesday, June 24th, 2026. And today we're going to talk about how there's been two more arrests in the UFC 250 would-be terrorist attack. We're going to revisit the Brett Kavanaugh would-be assassination attempt. There's a soap opera in FBI San Francisco, and the FBI continues to lie on social media. So let's get after it. Fair warning, guys. We're going to be really FBI heavy today. We're going to be really court document heavy today. We're going to nerd out on all that lawyer stuff, but I think it'll be well worth your time. And before we do that, though, I actually wanted to nerd out on something else. And that's some terminology that it occurred to me that I might throw out here or there, and I haven't actually edified it for you. I haven't given you the background information. So unless you happen to work in the business, in the industry of law enforcement, then you might not know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, today, I'm entitling the show Reasonable Doubts because I have some doubts about the information that's being presented to us and a plethora of documents that we'll dig into in a couple of minutes. But it's sort of a play on the term, reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt. You watch Law and Order, right? You watch the jury trials and those TV shows and the movies. The jury has to get beyond a reasonable doubt in order to convict somebody of a crime. But I want to actually work through a couple of the terms so that if I happen to throw them out or you happen to see them on some sort of court TV program or in the general news, you read it, just so you know what is being referred to. And there's different levels of certainty, different levels of doubt that you have to work your way through in law enforcement, and they're all really important. First one is reasonable suspicion. That's the lowest threshold. Reasonable suspicion is like a little bit more than a hunch. You have to examine the totality of the circumstances is another term du jour. You look at everything. You don't actually need evidence, but you can look at concrete, some sort of clues to find out if you have reasonable suspicion. The example I could use would be you're a police officer doing patrol and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you happen to see somebody standing at the back entrance to a convenience store that's closed. It's 2 a.m. They're loitering around that area. They have no reason to be there. Do you have evidence of a crime? No. But you have a reasonable suspicion that that person might be about to engage in a crime, and you, by the law, are allowed to stop them and ask them a couple questions until you can ascertain about the totality of the circumstances. They could say, "Oh yeah, I'm the owner and I'm waiting on a locksmith." Or they might be an evildoer. So you have to do further investigation at that point. You cannot arrest somebody based solely on reasonable suspicion. It requires more work. Now, the next level up, probable cause. Probable cause, you can make an arrest. That's where there's a logical and an objective belief that's supported by actual evidence that someone has engaged in a crime or was about to engage in a crime. Like, back to our example of the cop. The cop makes a traffic stop because somebody's tail light is out. They walk up to the car and they see that the driver has bloodshot eyes and there's empty beer bottles all over and they are slurring their speech. You now have probable cause that this is an intoxicated driver. You can make an arrest off of that. Next level up. That's out of the, I guess, criminal sphere. We'll get more into the civil sphere with this one. It's preponderance of evidence. You hear this in a lawsuit. It's essentially 50% plus one. Whatever molecule is necessary to get to just over 50%, and that means that that individual wins in the lawsuit. And then finally, there's the reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt. And the definition I have for that is proven guilty to the point that there is no logical, common sense explanation other than that a defendant committed the crime. It doesn't have to be 100%. You could throw out things that are fantastical, right? I mean, let's say that someone has been convicted or at least is facing a conviction for child pornography. And what's been presented by the prosecutors is, hey, there were images found on this person's computer. They live alone. No one has access to their computer. Pretty open and shut case. Is it 100%? No. I mean, I suppose that Tom Cruise could have descended out of the ceiling, Mission Impossible style, and installed child pornography on that person's computer. But you would hope that a jury wouldn't acquit based on that. So those are the four terms that I'll throw out here and there. I just want to make sure you're tracking on them: reasonable suspicion, probable cause, preponderance of evidence, and beyond a reasonable doubt. All right. The teaching session is over, and I want to get to the stories I want to cover down on today. And we're going to be FBI heavy. We're going to be court document heavy. And let's start actually with the press release from the FBI, which was very excited to announce on Monday that they have two more individuals in custody, individuals related to the UFC 250 averted terrorist plot that we talked about, with this guy Tyson Proper being the first one who was arrested a week ago. The headline of the press release is FBI arrests two more men in Washington and Missouri in connection with planned attack on government officials at White House UFC event. A little bit from the press release. Two more have been arrested since Friday in a fast-moving FBI investigation. Quote from the FBI director, medium password strength, Kash Patel, quote, "These arrests are the latest result of the FBI teaming up with our great partners to identify, apprehend those who allegedly wanted to attack the UFC Freedom 250 event, a threat this FBI and our partners prevented." Now, I was able to get a charging document for one of these individuals, and I want to work our way through it because as this case has been built out, we're learning a little bit on the fringes more and more. And I'm waiting to find out exactly how many government assets and informants and undercovers may or may not have been involved in it. And so I dug into it because this guy here, one of the two who was arrested, his name is Jordan Rinker. Now, the entire affidavit to charge this guy is 38 pages, and they don't actually talk about him for the first 23 of them because everything is all the buildup and the background and the copying and the pasting of all the other people who have been already arrested. And up to this point, there had been 5 of the alleged 23 arrested. And for background, if you didn't happen to catch the episodes that we covered down on this averted would-be assassination / domestic terrorist attack at the UFC Freedom 250 event at the White House, where we were having cage fights and ground and pound at the president's house for reasons unknown to me. Here was the plot. And when I say plot, we really have to examine whether or not there was a predisposition to engage in the illegal activity and the actual capability. Was it beyond a reasonable doubt that this would have ever happened if they had been left to their own devices? Well, we were told that Tyson Proper was the 19-year-old who was fat and had a neck beard and prematurely bald. He was Baker acted. He was involuntarily committed because his mommy called the police and the sheriff's department in order to report him acting very suspiciously. He was institutionalized and then interviewed, and they found out at that point that there was some sort of militia that was trying to engage in an assassination attempt at this UFC event. The plot was there was about 24 individuals who were planning to travel to Washington, D.C. from all over the country. And they were going to use drones armed with explosives without knowledge, I guess, that drones can't fly over the White House. Commercial drones aren't capable of doing that. The geofence technology does not permit it, just for this exact same reason. And we have no information about the explosives. And then they were going to blow up all this stuff. And the 4,000 people who were in attendance to watch the cage fighting would then just stampede off the White House grounds to a strategically placed spot where there were going to be snipers waiting to take out high-valued target amidst the 4,000 people running around. They were just such sharpshooters. They were just physical specimens, tier 1 operators. And their motivations were, one, military, militia, violent extremism. They were Christian, anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists because they had a problem with people who were getting away with Epstein running the government. They were anti-tech violent extremists because they didn't like data centers. They were anti-Israel and anti-Semitic because their high-value targets were taking money from AIPAC, and their leader, much to the pleasure of the Fox News watching audience. His name was Abraham Hermosillo Alvarez. An illegal alien doesn't sound very much like a white supremacist. That's the background. Now let's actually talk about Jordan Rinker's involvement with this. So the charging document for him, it actually starts to mention his name at paragraph 64 on page 24 of this document because they had to fill in all the background. He's the guy who was involved in conversations in the Signal chat groups with these guys, and he went by the pseudonym Shriveled Schlong because he's just so mature. He was in a chat with the main bad guy, or I guess by the main, I mean the leader, whose name again was Abraham Alvarez. He was in a chat with Alvarez June 11th. The event was June 14th, so 3 days ahead of time. Based on the knowledge of the investigation, they believe that Shriveled Schlong is in fact Jordan Rinker. Alvarez stated that this op is still a go. We have 72 hours. Let's scroll down now to paragraph 65. 3 days ahead of time, and they're saying we're all systems a go. Alvarez said, we need teams equipped and ready. Meet in St. Joseph, Missouri. There is a base in Ozark Lake with a cabin south in Missouri, and it has a firearm that I purchased, and we need to ready if possible. So the leader of the entire thing wants to meet in Missouri, even though the event is in 3 days, and he wants to go and grab his gun there. The safe zone coordinates for you in Virginia, I will provide to team leaders and the pilot, and it's to have someone pick up our team near the river. We will then coordinate an air evac. So they planned on an exfiltration strategy because the strategy was to actually overthrow the United States government and I guess run away and hide, which would have required them to either swim through the Potomac River or have a pilot pick them up. No further information. Again, I'm being very, very tongue-in-cheek, very sarcastic with this because we have to examine, guys, whether or not there was a predisposition, which there seems to be from reading through this, and was there a capability? You might intend to do things. Crazy people have a predisposition to do bad things all the time. The question is, are they fully capable of doing that? And this is looking more and more absurd. And this doesn't even include the current guy who was charged by this document. That's including this guy who was institutionalized as Proper and this other guy, Alvarez, who was the leader, the grand schemer of everything. Now, paragraph 66. Our guy here, Rinker, he stated that all he could do was to make drone frames and would need funding for the motors and the hardware. He could just make the bodies, but he had no engines to actually make the drones. This is, again, guys, 2 to 3 days before the attack is supposed to happen, and they don't even have the drones. Alvarez responded that he could provide him with the money that he would need to buy the motors and the hardware. A little bit further on, we go all the way down, scrolling. Again, not really much about Rinker until we get to paragraph 72. Paragraph 72. Alvarez's phone contained direct messages on Signal between Rinker and Alvarez. June 11th, Rinker said, found a guy with a quarter, a half, and full sticks. And the FBI presumes this means dynamite. June 12th, now 2 days ahead of time, Rinker said, things printing like a damn champ, brother. And you can see from the image here that this is a 3D printer, that he's supposed to be 3D printing the drones that are going to be capable of flying over the White House with explosives. Much further on now, jumping down to paragraph 77, and we are almost through the entire document. Paragraph 77. On June 11th, Rinker forwarded a picture of his Cash App handle to Alvarez, which contained his first and last name, Jordan Rinker. So he has great operational security. His Shriveled Schlong pseudonym is not really cutting it. It actually gives his name. FBI agents actually then do surveillance of Mr. Rinker and find him living with his mom. Again, kind of a loser. He was arrested on June 21st, 1 week after the averted attack. Now, they do a search warrant, they do an arrest, and they wound up trying to interview Jordan Rinker, who's dumb enough to talk to them because he is not a high intelligence person. And this is actually what Jordan Rinker tells the FBI agents after they read him his Miranda rights and interview him. He stated that he utilized the moniker Shriveled Schlong, so he's now admitted to being the person on the chats. He admitted he recently met with Alvarez, the illegal alien leader in Omaha, Nebraska, even though this guy lives in Missouri. And Alvarez gave him $1,200. The $1,200 was for him to spread around to everybody so that would pay for their gas when they drove to the Capitol. He also received a bunch of different gear from the guy. It included a 3D printer with some filaments. He got night vision goggles, binoculars, a wire checker, I guess, because if he was talking to somebody who he was suspicious of, maybe they were wearing a wire. Rinker told the FBI that he drove to see Alvarez because he wanted to make a friend. Oh, so other than being really dumb and down on his luck and lonely and living with mama, he sounds kind of like a vulnerable person. Probably not capable of carrying this out. How incapable was he? He stated that he thought he would benefit financially from the 3D printer because he would just make crafts and sell them. And he said that he hadn't done anything to make drones. He was just kind of talking out of his butt. And the final thing that he winds up telling the FBI, which is probably why Mr. Rinker is going to go to prison for a really long time, he stated that he had, where is it? 84, paragraph 84. Rinker stated that he traded with Alvarez a 12 gauge shotgun with ammunition filled bandolier, and that is effing him the most because now he knows that he's armed a terrorist. So providing material support to terrorism is exactly what he's likely to face. Ultimately, though, the question that I present to you, dear AMRADs on the AMRAD pod today on this Wednesday, is capability. I've got doubts. I've got significant doubts that this person was capable of having carried forward this attack on the White House. Does that mean that he needs to be ollie oxen free, roaming free? Probably not. Maybe needs to be institutionalized. Maybe needs to be in prison for willfully engaging in unlawful activity. He, after all, did recognize that he sold a shotgun to a guy, but he did acknowledge that after the guy had already been arrested. But we know that he was engaging in these chats. There has to be some modicum of justice and accountability here. Do we need to have the spiking of the football from the FBI that they have averted this gigantic terrorist assassination plot? No. I have doubts this is ever going to happen. And I think that the FBI director, Kash Patel, medium password strength, did as well, which would explain why he attended the event with his girlfriend, knowing full well that there were 18 co-conspirators who had not yet been brought to justice. All right, now let's talk about somebody else who actually did have intent and capability and has eluded quite a bit of accountability. And this is a callback to a couple of episodes that we've done in the past. And this is about this Brett Kavanaugh would-be assassin. The story comes from the Washington Post because the DOJ is pushing back on the sentencing that happened for this would-be assassin. The headline is, "She got 8 years for plotting to kill Justice Kavanaugh. Prosecutors want more." And if you happen to catch the pronoun being she, that is a good catch by you guys because it's a he, it's a dude who feels pretty, and the Washington Post is super woke because democracy dies in darkness, and they don't want to dead name the would-be assassin of a Supreme Court justice. From her home in California, 26-year-old Sophie Roski figured out Brett Kavanaugh's address in Maryland. She bought a gun, practiced shooting, and acquired lock-picking tools, black face paint, and a laser sight. After packing her gear into a suitcase, she checked at the airport, flew across country, took a cab to Brett Kavanaugh's house, and arrived at 1 a.m. Roski's plan took shape over several weeks in 2022, and she was later arrested blocks from Kavanaugh's home and pled guilty to attempting to assassinate the Supreme Court justice. There was also conversations that were going on between this assassin and individuals on Discord, one of which is quoted here in this Washington Post piece. The Discord user, who's unidentified, says, "What you trying to do?" And Roski responded, "Remove some people from the Supreme Court. I could get at least one, which would change the votes for decades to come, and I am shooting for 3. Sounds a little bit more serious than the likes of the last guy that we had, the one that was just arrested, this Jordan Rinker character. But the judge in this case examined all the facts, and after all, Mr. Roski pled guilty and wound up sentencing Mr. Roski to only 8 years in prison. We had probable cause. to make the arrest because Roski turned himself in to the marshals. The only thing that deterred him was the U.S. Marshals who were standing guard outside Brett Kavanaugh's house to defend him and his family. Roski wound up turning himself in to the authorities. He was every bit as competent and capable and predisposed to engage in an assassination attempt, more so than any of the individuals from my humble reading of all the charging documents for this UFC Freedom 250 event. And he winds up getting 8 years in prison. Now, the judge here, who is a Joe Biden appointee, her name is Deborah Boardman, and we covered down on her in January of this year. Rose Lopez, our archivist on YouTube and Rumble at AmRadPod. It's a January 9th episode called Use of Force. Rose, she'll do me a solid. She'll put the link to it in the show notes for today. Here's the quotations from the good judge in this case. She has taken full responsibility for her actions. This is somebody who went to college. This is somebody who went to law school, who you would think would know that Harry can't become a Sally, but never let reality get in the way of a good old-fashioned communist narrative. The judge acknowledged that this crime did involve domestic terrorism, but undid most of the terrorism enhancements. So there were supposed to be enhancements attached to it because there actually isn't a law for domestic terrorism on the books. Did you know that? For all the categories that exist, from the FBI, militia violent extremist, racially motivated violent extremist, anti-government, anti-authority violent extremist, nihilistic violent extremist, anti-tech violent extremist. It goes on and on and on. There's not actually a law for domestic terrorism. It's an enhancement. You did something illegal. It broke the federal law. So we're going to enhance it because there was some sort of an ideology attached to it. And the judge in this case undid it. Another couple quotes. Miss Roski came out to herself as transgender in 2020, but kept it secret. That's why this dude flew across the country. Miss Roski's sister came out as gay 2 years prior, but Miss Roski saw that their parents struggled to reconcile her sexuality with their religious beliefs. They can't even use the right pronouns there. I thought you're not dead naming, so you're not going to recognize a he or a she. You're just going to say they, thems at this point. This judge is retarded. Just as retarded, I guess, as probably the people who thought they could fly drones over the White House. Quote, I am heartened that this terrible infraction has helped the Roski family accept their daughter for who she is, said Judge Deborah Boardman. Now, hopefully, the DOJ triumphs in its appeal to send Mr. Roski to prison for the rest of his life, because he certainly did try to do an assassination attempt. He had every intention of doing it. He took overt acts in order to do it, and admitted to that fact, and he is going to the pokey, hopefully for more than about 8 years. All right. So let's pause for a moment, guys, and I want to make sure we plug the show, the American Radicals podcast, on YouTube and Rumble. You can find us every weekday at AmRadPod, noontime Eastern here, and you can also check us out over at Spotify, as well as American Radicals podcast at AmRadPod. Please do give us a follow, thumbs up, leave some comments on all of those different platforms, but especially I humbly request you head on over to Spotify. That is the most lucrative for us because we make triple digits there, guys, not double digits. And I will plan to air a commercial right about now. And now we can pivot over to some soap opera madness, and we're going to nerd out again on some court documents because there is quite a bit of drama in FBI San Francisco. I would say love triangle, but I think it's more of like a love hexagon, maybe octagon. There you go. There's a nice reference to the cage fighting, because a lawsuit just came forward from a female agent. She's not known. She goes by Jane Doe, about her trials and tribulations over the last 3 to 4 years, having worked in the San Francisco field office, the San Jose resident agency, on a squad of some dudes. And I want to look at the facts that are presented in this lawsuit. Now, granted, they're coming from Jane Doe. They're going to be prejudiced very much in her favor. But I want to look at these, present them, and give you maybe some insight and some commentary. And we're going to talk about, do we have reasonable suspicion that these things happened? Do we have probable cause that they did? And is there a reasonable doubt? Can we get beyond a reasonable doubt that the offending parties are in fact guilty, or is there equal guilt to go all around and we just are going to have to say everybody should be fired? I will put the bottom line up front. Everybody needs to get fired here, but we'll work our way through it. And it is long. I mean, there's more in this lawsuit than there's presented against Jordan Rinker. And allegedly, he tried to kill the president. So let's start there. This is the actual PDF document for the lawsuit out of the Northern District of California. Jane Doe, she's suing Todd Blanche, the Attorney General of the United States of America. Now, we'll go all the way down and begin at paragraph 11, which gives you the background. This is the statement of facts. This is civil, guys. This would mean that we have to get to a preponderance of evidence, 50% plus one, that Jane Doe is correct. And unfortunately, I think she's probably going to wind up getting a lot of money on this because there's some dirtbags here, even if she is an equal opportunity contributor to the entire toxic environment that went on. But how toxic? Well, Jane Doe has been employed as a special agent with the FBI since April 2022. April 14th, 2023. So she's still a probationary agent in this case. She goes on a work trip in Colorado to attend a conference with two other special agents who are not named. They're called Special Agent 1 and Special Agent 2. Now, when Jane Doe arrives, Special Agents 1 and 2 are already at the bar and they say, hey, come meet us. Don't even drop off your luggage. And she does. She goes drinking with them at the bar. Jane Doe wound up receiving a bunch of drinks from these guys at their expense. And she also notes that it was apparent that they had been there for a while and were rather inebriated. They buy her a bunch of drinks and she gets drunk. How do they put it here in paragraph 15? They purchased drinks for her and continued to order and pay for alcoholic drinks until she was visibly intoxicated. I don't know how she can ascertain if she's visibly intoxicated. Wouldn't she have to ask them? But I don't know. I guess that's me being a little bit specific and pedantic. But this is, after all, supposed to be based on the preponderance of the evidence. While at the bar, Special Agents 1 and 2 insinuated that Jane Doe and their supervisor, who is now called Supervisor Special Agent 3, were having an affair. And that was not true. And she got really offended and she felt very uncomfortable, but she still kept drinking. That night, Jane Doe, Special Agent 1, Special Agent 2, took a rideshare home. And then Special Agent 2 winds up sending a text message to Jane Doe. And he asks her to come to his room and make mistakes. Now, Jane Doe says no. She politely turns down the offer. Let's pause it there. And let's just kind of noodle out a couple things here. Jane Doe works for the FBI. She's worked there for about a year now. Might she be feeling a little bit of pressure here? I guess Special Agent 1 is her training officer or training agent in this case. She could be trying to just go along to get along. But if this sort of inappropriate action is happening, you would think that she'd be pumping the brakes pretty hard. But I don't know. Maybe she course corrected. Maybe she told somebody. Or did she just continue doing exactly the same thing the next day? Spoiler, she's continued doing exactly the same thing the next day. So we go to the following day, August 16th, and the group of special agents, including Jane Doe, Special Agent 1, Special Agent 2, went out for dinner and drinks. They purchased lots of drinks for her. She became drunk again. After the social outing, Jane Doe went to her hotel room. Special Agent 2 started texting her again, saying, hey, send me some nudes. She says no. He says, okay, good night. But that wasn't the end, because Jane Doe became sick from alcohol and went to bed. But subsequently, she found out, because she has no recollection of this. This is how plastered this woman was. And because this agent has already admitted it, Special Agent 2, that he came to her hotel room and they had inappropriate conduct of a sexual nature. So she has no recollection. Might she have been drunken to the point where she blacked out? Yeah, that's entirely possible. But I think hotel rooms have a door that needs to be opened. So she willingly opened the door. So there is a little bit of a takes two to tango angle here. But Special Agent 2 said that he did, in fact, do the hanky-panky with this Jane Doe. Now we'll go a little bit further. Now we're at paragraph 20. Beginning in September 2023, so a month later, they give her a return from this conference. Special Agent 2 began to belittle, demean, and harass her. So he's already had his conquest, and now he is starting to bully her in the office. Paragraph 21. The Special Agent 1, who was the training agent for Jane Doe. So not an actual official supervisor, but kind of like gives you make sure you're minding your P's and Q's, you're doing everything. Special Agent 1, in October, Jane Doe was a probationary employee and was assigned to work a case under Special Agent 1. Special Agent 1 became the relief supervisor, which is not official full-time position, but is managerial in nature. And he got a little bit authoritative, according to Jane Doe, because he was also a firearms instructor, and she asserts that he could take her gun away. So now she's got a power dynamic in play. Special Agent 2 was the one that she did the hanky-panky with. Special Agent 1 was the supervisor, relieving, but also her training agent and firearms instructor. Paragraph 22. I'm sorry, guys. We're going to have to work with this because this is like The Young and the Restless. It gets crazy. November 2023. We're now a couple months after the incident in Colorado. Jane Doe met with her training agent in an effort to resolve his aggressive and exclusionary conduct. So she Karen'd him and said, "You're being too aggressive with me." But he continued to exclude her from critical updates, meetings, and interviews related to assigned cases, probably because he was working cases that didn't include her. Paragraph 23. Now, we are June 2024, so 8 months after everything. Special Agents 1, Special Agents 2, they went to not their boss, who's Special Agent 3. They went to Special Agent 4, who's on their squad with them, and started making comments to this fourth dude that he's the one actually having the affair with Jane Doe. So this guy's just sitting there like Lieutenant Weinberg and an officer and a gentleman and saying like, this doesn't involve me at all. Why are you bothering me? I'm a married man. I got kids. But they're having lots of workplace romance drama, right? Special Agent 2, he's already hit it and quit it, but maybe he doesn't necessarily want to quit it. And he's feeling a little bit jealous because I guess Jane Doe and Special Agent 4 have a familial relationship. Now, Jane Doe learned that Special Agents 1 and 2 insinuated this entire affair with Special Agent 4, and she got uber offended. And she winds up going to sit down with the Special Agent 4, who they've accused her of having an affair with, to talk about their case. And according to Jane Doe, they go to the conference room, and it was their tradition or their habit or their practice to close the door when they went to the conference room to discuss these uber mega Doppler important case details. And Special Agent 4 says, hey, other people in the squad think that we're doing the nasty behind my wife's back. So we're going to leave the door open because I don't need to have the heat. And Jane Doe got really offended by that. Paragraph 25. Jane Doe was so distraught by the special agent's conduct on her squad that she could not focus on her work and was required to leave the office for the day. She reported the circumstances to an intelligence analyst, Special Agent number 5, and the assistant special agent in charge, number 6, Special Agent number 6. So we have now involved 7 individuals in this lawsuit. And the ASAC, the assistant special agent in charge, is probably the most appropriate individual to go to at this point, seeing as how your supervisor hasn't taken corrective action, if there in fact was corrective action to take. Let me move it on down now. We're going to go to paragraph 26. Jane Doe confronted Special Agent number 2, the dude who she had the actual sexual escapade with almost a year before. She confronted him about the situation, which is exactly, I'm sure, what he wanted to have happen in the workplace. Jane Doe informed him that his conduct was extremely upsetting and it harmed her personally and professionally, and asked him to stop. After Jane Doe's conversation, the Special Agent number 2 confronted number 4, the guy who he thinks that she's having the affair with, and they kind of have it out in the office. This is America's premier law enforcement agency, guys. $11 billion, only the best and brightest. I was told at the FBI Academy that somewhere in the area of 50,000 people applied for my very same position, which would mean that there were 2.5 million job applications for everybody in my class, but never let math get in the way of making a point of just how awesome you are to work at the FBI, or you're auditioning for Real Housewives or The Real World on MTV. And we're not done yet. Paragraph 27. Let's see if I can bring it up. My tech is kind of glitchy for right now. I don't know. That's delayed. I think you're all are able to see it here, but if you're not, no worries. I will cover down on it no matter what. On June 24th, 2024, guys, so 2 years ago to the date, Jane Doe reported Special Agents 1 and 2, their improper conduct to her boss. So she's already gone above the boss to the assistant special agent in charge, but now she's officially doing it because she wants to go through the proper channels. She probably is planning on a lawsuit. Now, to his credit, the special agent number 3, the supervisor of this completely wacky squad, he goes and does his own investigation, and he essentially confirms everything that happened in Colorado and all the drunken chicanery and the way that these dudes are acting towards her. So it's confirmed. A couple days later, Jane Doe informed her boss that her training agent, Special Agent 1, made some comments about her and made her uncomfortable. So she's continuing to push the issue. She feels that he's sexualizing her, and she didn't feel comfortable walking past him, and her supervisor failed to take appropriate corrective action, according to Jane Doe. Still in the same month, we're now at paragraph 30. Starting in June 2024, and immediately after Jane Doe reported Special Agent number 2, the sexual partner, and Special Agent number 1, the training agent, their improper conduct, those two dudes began to marginalize, sideline, exclude, and isolate her from normal workplace activities. Okay, not to be like a jerk to this woman, because perhaps she was, in fact, feeling very uncomfortable and being sexualized, and you wouldn't want to have her be sexually assaulted. I wasn't in the room. But if you've made these allegations, you think that it's going to be comfortable in the workspace? I mean, do you want them giving you high fives and just shooting the bleep with you after work, being like, hey, let's go grab a beer. You're in the club with us. What do you expect? So I don't really have a patience for that sort of insinuation. Things are awkward around here. Yeah, because you charge them with making these sexual comments, and one guy being inappropriate and touching you, and another guy being, I think she said, aggressive, like he walked at her desk very aggressively, because these guys are just the best and the brightest, fidelity, bravery, integrity. They're uber mature. And they're going to respond, I think. I'm going to give them a little bit of latitude on maybe being awkward because they just don't want to talk to you because they're worried that they're going to get jammed up even more. Now, here's where I know I'm right on this, because Jane Doe did expect to be welcomed back into the circle of trust within this squad. Here's her comment that she makes in paragraph 30. Special Agent 2 and Special Agent 1 excluded Jane Doe from regular squad walks, where Jane Doe and her coworkers would take daily group walks. Did they have painting sessions and maybe some chair yoga, some coloring books on the table after that? This is an unserious squad. This is an unserious organization. Paragraph 32, Special Agent 1, the training agent, continued to engage in hostile, aggressive behavior. He rolled his eyes at her. He dismissed her comments, and he disregarded her presence. He's hurting her feelings. Paragraph 33, and we're almost through this entire thing. Jane Doe spent approximately 1 month writing a search warrant at the request of her training agent, Special Agent 1. However, he had failed to do a preservation request. So, for some further education of the way these things work, let's say you want to get a search warrant for somebody's Facebook account. What you will immediately do, there's an online portal for law enforcement. You go in and say, hey, here's a preservation request. I'm from the FBI. I'm working on a search warrant, because otherwise that information could be deleted forever, and then you're kind of screwed. You can't actually get that information to bring forward in your case, to bring forward in your prosecution. Now, this experienced agent forgot to do that. Again, only the best and the brightest. And then that messed up their entire search warrant because it wound up being not really useful. And then let's not breeze over the fact that it took this special agent of the FBI. She's not that new anymore. She's been around for a couple years. It took her a month to type a search warrant, which is ridiculous. And that wound up being an embarrassment to Jane Doe that her search warrant did not proceed on because her supervisory agent, her training agent failed to do the preservation request. It should be an embarrassment to them both. Paragraph 34, Jane Doe was scheduled to do a rotation on a surveillance operations group, which was required for her as a new agent, and that winds up getting canceled. And during that time, her training agent wound up taking the cases that were assigned to her and reassigning them to himself and to other agents because they were anticipating her not being around. But because she wound up not being on this surveillance operation, she didn't have any work to do. And she said that that hurt her ability because she was stunted in her ability to progress in her career and perhaps promote in her career. Because at what, 3.5 years in the FBI, she should immediately be looking to promote to Washington, D.C. as some sort of a program manager, which is essentially what she wanted to do. That's what she aspired to do, likely. Now, we have Jane Doe reported harassing and disparate conduct to her supervisor, her supervisory agent, and no appropriate corrective action was taken. And in short, that's what is actually listed here. It's belabored, pretty long, so failed in that attempt. Jane Doe suffered retaliatory and punitive action for reporting harassment in a hostile work environment because in July 2025, 3 years after everything began, they got it brought in, and the assistant special agent in charge said, we've looked at the situation and likely, and I'm going to insert my opinion here, said, you're all retarded. You're all playing like this is a soap opera. You're unprofessional. I'm breaking this squad down, and removed Jane Doe from the squad as opposed to the other guys who were allowed to remain on the squad, probably because they were more productive actually working cases while Jane Doe was busy working on a search warrant for over a month and the rest of the time plotting her lawsuit. She was moved to a different squad, and according to Jane Doe, this has hurt her because she has now, again, not getting the assignments that are necessary for her to promote. Oh, and one last thing. The assistant special agent in charge informed Jane Doe that people are allowed to invite or not invite other people who they want to socialize with, so she shouldn't be so offended about not getting invited on group walks. Preponderance of evidence. Yeah, these guys are dirtbags. Jane Doe is probably going to make millions of dollars because it's just not worth the headache. FBI doesn't want a hashtag Me Too incident from going on. But beyond a reasonable doubt, unquestionably, there is no sort of Tom Cruise coming out of the ceiling that I will be willing to consider with this. They all deserve to be summarily dismissed, terminated, be sitting at home with non-restrictive waistbands like yours truly. Okay. I have one more that I want to get to, and it is another FBI thing, and this one comes from social media, and this is from the FBI's Rapid Response Twitter account because they're doing the Timu Trump, the White House Rapid Response page. They had to have an FBI Rapid Response, which Daniel Bongino, as the former co-deputy director for 292 days, created and then handed over likely to FBI Director, Media and Past Restraint, Kash Patel. If you happen to read it, it sounds a lot like Cash App. But there's a whole bunch of things because they're trying to take on, if you read here, the lying media. Announcement to the lying media, while the fake news with their declining ratings wants to continue to lie and attack, we know we are over the target. And then they list off a bunch of bullet points that I want to go through a bunch of them on. But it sounds like they are either trying to do Timu Trump, or maybe they went to ChatGPT and said, write this tweet for us as if the president of the United States did, but just have better punctuation and capitalization. Bullet points. This FBI with this Department of Justice has dropped the murder rate 20 points. Not a federal crime. It has nothing to do with the FBI. Unless it happens on an Indian reservation or the high seas or a military base. Nothing to do. Murder is not a federal crime. And every time the FBI announces the arrest of a murderer, it's because it was an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, or they wind up charging with the gun crime. This FBI with the DOJ has captured 8 of the top 10 most wanted fugitives in the world. Yeah, that you put on the list. You put one person on the list and arrested them 70 minutes later because it's a marketing scheme. It's PR. It's not legitimate. This FBI has captured 2 of the most wanted fraudsters within the first 2 weeks of announcing the fraudster list. You mean the fraudster list that the anti-fraud task force from the White House put out? The anti-fraud task force that's headed by JD Vance, Vice President of the United States, and the chairman of the FTC, because the FBI isn't involved in it. The FBI is Uber. So whoever JD Vance finds as a fraudster, FBI just coordinates with a foreign country and to facilitate their arrival back to the United States. Y'all are Uber. This FBI has arrested 43% more spies in 14 months than the entirety of the previous administration. So they've arrested 43% more spies than the Biden administration did in 4 years. 43% is a very specific number. And I'm a numbers guy. Spies don't get arrested very often. They're normally PNG'd, persona non grata. They're booted out of the country. Getting a PNG is like the material support to terrorism is for a counterterrorism agent. If you're a counterintelligence agent, like, oh, I got that guy PNG'd. They very seldom charge somebody with a crime. So the baseline number is likely not very large. So 43%. They didn't go with 40, which would have been harder to compute. I mean, 40 could have meant, well, we had 100 last year, and then we had 140 this year. It could have been, we had 1,000 last year. We had 1,400 this year. Round numbers, 43%. That means they arrested 7 last year and they got 10 this time. That's 43%. Well done, I guess. Under the initiative that you're going to boost the number of counterintelligence arrests, you got 3 more people. Congratulations, FBI Director, Medium Password Strength. And then the last one, and we've gone over it before, but it offends my sensibility so much, I'm going to do it again. This FBI has found 6,300 child victims. 6,300 families have their kids back, a 22% increase from the previous administration. And this is extra offensive because they're actually saying that these kids will return to their families. That would mean, just numbers, that the FBI is returning 500 children per month to their families. They don't work weekends, which would mean that they're returning 25 children home to their parents every single workday. And the FBI director who can't get off of social media for 15 seconds never posts a photo op, even if they had to blur out the kid's face. No, it didn't, because those numbers are garbage. They're completely bunk. 6,300 located children is information that they got from NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Those are the people who work all day long identifying child pornography that's referred over to them by Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And they look at it and they identify it and they confirm that, yes, in fact, this is child sexual abuse material. And then they take all that information and they load it into a dashboard for law enforcement to bring forward a judicious prosecution of the evildoer. It has their IP addresses, their account information, their phone numbers, their geolocation, everything in there. The case is essentially sewn up. The dashboard is called Cyber Tips. I know, because I had to ask local law enforcement to get access to it because the FBI would not pay for me to get access to it. NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, is doing the God's work, and they identify the kids after years sometimes of looking at the same material over and over and over again, because child pornography is digital. It's easy to transmit from one user to another. And the same image might be captured on one account on Facebook one day and a TikTok account the next day. And the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children will do the work to identify the kid in that. And a lot of times they're not even a kid anymore. And by law, that person, once they are identified, is now a victim every single time that child sexual abuse material pops up in a case. If a person is being prosecuted, they have to be notified. They're re-victimized over and over and over again. So we essentially have to identify them so that we can notify them. And often those individuals will then just opt out and say, look, you're calling me every day. These images were out there. I'm 30 years old now. And when NCMEC identifies the 30-year-old, who was a 4-year-old in all these images because it was captured years and years and years ago. And this is historical child pornography. Back in the days when they didn't call it CSAM, child sexual abuse material, they just called it kiddie porn. And the NCMEC operators will say, oh, we recognize that kid. We see those bed sheets. We see that wallpaper. We see that carpet. We've seen this video series before. So for the time being, we're going to call this little girl Little Susie. And then they eventually identify Little Susie and who she actually is. And that identification is what the FBI is taking credit for. They haven't reunited families at all. They're taking credit for the work of people who are actually doing legitimate work, and they're creating a false impression that they're actually reuniting families, which is just disgusting. All right, so reasonable doubts. We're at the end of the show, guys. I want to leave you with the biblical worldview and cover back on what we talked about today. Our worldview comes from Joshua chapter 23, verse 14. You know in all your hearts and all your souls that not one word of all the good words which the Lord your God spoke concerning you has failed. Can't trust much else, can you? Particularly from America's premier, preeminent $11 billion law enforcement agency, right? I've got significant doubts about the veracity of the actual threat at the UFC Freedom 250 event at the White House a couple of weeks ago. There might have been some predisposition to engage in it, but capability was certainly lacking, and we've extrapolated on that quite a bit. Kavanaugh assassin, completely different story. When you look through the lens of capability, predisposition, there needs to be accountability now. And unfortunately, it looks like the judge in that case, because she was upset about the Dobbs decision, is more than happy to let an assassin out of prison after 8 years. We have soap operas happening, and that's just one office in the FBI. That sort of thing is going on all the time, and continuing to lie on social media. We have to have our doubts that this is an uber competent and capable and professional agency that should be charged with the protection of the American people against fraud and force, because ultimately it's kind of a joke. It needs to go the way of the dodo bird, JFK style, shattered into 1,000 pieces and scattered to the wind. That is the only objectively good thing. That is the only thing that I can say beyond a reasonable doubt that would be an objective good for the American people. All right, guys, we are done for today on the American Radicals podcast. We will return back with you tomorrow, noontime Eastern, here on Rumble, YouTube at AmRadPod. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRad.